Okay. What do you guys call them?
Daily thing.
Yeah.
We'll call us differently.
I know.
Oh,
Well, I'm used to commissioner from my side. So.
yeah.
15 more seconds for niceties, and then we're going to get going.
Stop being.
That Jillian conspiracy. That's so bad.
Ready? Technically.
Yes, technically ready. And one of our members was online, and then Ivory isn't able to join us today. There was a family.
Okay. All right. Ready?
Yes.
Great.
Thank
Good
you.
morning, everyone. Welcome to the Steering and Oversight Committee meeting for May for the Homeless Response System. Appreciate everybody taking the time to be here. And I know that we've had some family stuff. So Anna, thank you for being here virtually. Welcome to our main meeting. So today we are going to get a very brief updates on active policy work. I think this is something that we need to have as part of our ongoing agenda. So I've asked the team to really weave this in so that we can have a shared base as we're continuing the conversations and the work at this table. We're also going to receive an update and feedback and initial recommendations related to Measure 2, which is the shelter housing data related to Black, African American, and African community members. And so this was something that was brought up in a previous session. It was also a topic of conversation at one of our city-county joint sessions. And really, and so the directive was to come back with an update to this group. And so that we'll be having that conversation today. It's important that our shelter system serves each subpopulation equal to or more than they appear in our overall homeless population. That is our goal. There's interest for this engagement to take time to ensure that there's strong community process, and I appreciate that. But we wanted to make sure that this group was staying in touch with this, and this was one of the areas of work for that we needed to focus on. And then we have an opportunity to have a discussion related to the operations and policies of the existing shelter system, and have the opportunity to ask questions. So that will be more of a discussion part of our meeting today. A bulk of our meeting today will be a good discussion, update of information and some discussion around that. We have some guests who are going to be providing perspective and information on that. And then Jillian is going to provide us with a preview of the remainder of the work that will happen in 2025 for this committee. So we'll really get a sense of our work plan. So we have a lot to cover today. I encourage folks to be mindful of time. So everyone around the table has an opportunity to offer comments and questions. I'll kind of be keeping an eye on that and ask Jillian to do the same so we can make sure that folks have a chance to speak. So I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, I believe, to kick off the conversation on the policy discussions happening.
Okay. See you all. Thanks for coming out. Next in the building, and thanks for hosting us. Let me start. Great. So when the city and the county entered into the intergovernmental agreement to implement the homelessness response action plan, collectively we acknowledged that we needed a system that was both guided by clear goals and a detailed plan, but that it could also be flexible and adaptable over time, so that we could create mutual accountability and shared responsibility, but also leave room for evolution of work. So in its earliest stages, the green arrow there, we had pretty significant public engagement around the development of the plan. The IGA adoption had a lot of public conversations, particularly among the city and county's elected bodies. And then as we began implementation about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, we had a lot of really rapid fire, discrete action items that we were able to use to build significant early wins. So those were often pieces of work that were already in progress. They were pretty well defined. And most of the time we had already got signed budget associated with them. So we were able to move those along pretty quickly. We built the oversight system that this committee is part of from scratch, and started doing business across our jurisdictions and across multiple systems in new and collaborative ways that we hadn't seen as significantly, certainly for a while. Many of you will recall that there was an election somewhere in the middle of all of that. And so we had both a reaffirmation of the partnership that sits at the core of this work and a transition to new electeds in these oversight roles. So hence a little bit of a history lesson because we're all coming to shared understanding. So that brings us here to this middle phase that really started in winter of last year and is continuing through this spring, where data systems improvements that we heard a lot about at the last meeting are letting us think a lot more dynamically rather, about system level outcomes that we can monitor. We're in the process of actively course correcting on a number of actions where we're not seeing the outcomes that we've jointly prioritized. You'll get a deep dive on one of those areas later in the agenda. And our action items broadly have shifted toward more complex and less defined scopes. So these are action items that were, I wouldn't say aspirational by any means, but they were certainly less clear, both in terms of who we needed to have at the table to do that work well, but also what even was the specific nature of the work. Where were there good opportunities for quick advancement? And a lot of those action items that we're engaged in right now also require a lot of regional and state level alignment. So a broader set of partners, county alone. We've moved a lot of those action items into what we've called policy tables to really get into the weeds of that work. And so it's even a layer or two removed from our implementation committee. It's a lot of the folks who have the expertise that are doing the work at the ground level, trying to get together to understand how we can make those systems. I will say that, it's generally slower progress on these action items, but we're starting to tackle issues that a lot of us have circled around in these collaborative spaces, sometimes for decades. So it's comparatively quick progress that builds on a lot of work. Jillian will speak more to the last of these arrows toward the end as we between now and this fall begin shifting into the next phase of alignments to adopted budgets and moving into HRAP 2.0. So I'll save that for Jillian to cover. So especially while we're in that middle phase here, I wanted to keep you updated regarding several areas of shared alignment that's allowing us to really accelerate some of that cross-sector collaborative work that guides the plan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our policy table discussions between the homeless services system and youth and foster care, workforce systems, carceral, and healthcare systems. If you'll go, thank you. So to talk first about the youth foster care work, you'll see in each of these slides some of the organizational representation at these policy tables to give you it's certainly not exhaustive, but give you a flavor of the types of interjurisdictional and cross-sector collaboration that's occurring. So for this piece, youth foster care, Robin and our team leads this work with a lot of support from the Homeless Services Department, Department of County Human Services, and Home Forward. The work focuses mostly on supporting housing stability for youth transitioning out of foster care. It builds on a long collaboration between our homeless youth system and state and local human services programs that foster that support foster youth. That table is currently building out a fuller picture of the system landscape of services that are available to and support kids, youth in foster care. In particular, focusing on existing voucher access and then remaining gaps. So getting an idea of the number of youth who are currently accessing available resources, and then also an idea of how many more need access. And they'll come forward in the future with any promising opportunities that they see to start filling those gaps. Next slide. Just to talk briefly about the workforce table, I've led this initially. Deanna and our team is actually going to be picking it up. This work focuses on supporting employment training and employment placement for people who are in shelters or who are recently housed. It builds on almost a decade of collaboration between the Homeless Services Department and Work Systems Inc. as our local workforce investment board. The action item within the plan that this is organized around was actually looking to expand on that set of workforce programming. It's been highly successful, but I'll say that things have been in some flux lately, primarily because of threats to leverage federal funding that makes all of that work, but also some uncertainty around the availability of our local funding that supports that work. So we're reconvening with work systems soon to get a more up-to-date picture on potential impacts to existing services. And then from there, assess whether we're going to be able to look to any of those expanded opportunities that the plan calls for. So more to come. You'll see as a theme that this is each of these as policy tables is ongoing work. So I'm trying to give you a sense of work in progress as well as where we're going. So the next set of policy tables are organized around our intersection with carceral settings. So jail, predominantly local jail, but also looking at state prisons and return through community justice and parole and probation. I'll say this is probably our most complex set of partnerships for alignment. There are a lot of different players that touch these systems. There are two primary areas of focus within the plan that we've organized these tables around. The first is around healthcare access, particularly through transitions into and then out of jail, and making sure that people can have behavioral health care continuity as they move out of jail and back to community. And then the second area is improving access and housing for folks at release. Again, primary focus there on release from local jails, but also looking at prisons as well. The first set of work around the healthcare integration, it's mostly falling under the work that's just now fully ramping up to start implementing the Medicaid carceral benefit, which was approved fairly recently through Oregon's 1115 Medicaid waiver. Health Share is leading most of that work locally with a lot of collaboration with OHA to get it off the ground and local corrections staff. The benefit's looking to go live in January, so there's just a lot that's moving in that space right now. But because it's the same set of players and a very similar focus on continuity of care and access to care, as folks move through carceral systems, this work is folding in there pretty nicely. I don't know if you want to add anything. I feel like when I summarize, Health Shares.
No, I'll name, I think there's a lot of risk in this work, given federal funding and state budget challenges, the complexity of the benefit and the pace and implementation. So it's probably worth a deeper dive as we get a little more information from the state budget.
What was that? My apologies. Was that you think it won't happen come January, or you think that will even?
I think we're all proceeding on the path that it is. I think it's just a really complicated implementation that we should keep our eyes on.
Thank you.
The second set of work, making sure that we have shelter and housing access for folks as they're returning to community, has had a little bit of a setback at the state level, where we lost federal support for the technical assistance that had us participating with the Department of Corrections at the state level as part of a national cohort to reduce recidivism by improving housing stability and prison release. I'm not sure why that wouldn't be a federal priority, but it's not. They pulled that TA funding. So we're regrouping with our partners at Department of Corrections and particularly at Department of Community Justice here in Multnomah County. And we expect that work to continue, but it's going to be, I think, more limited without that external staffing and support that we were receiving through the TA. So more to come on that. But at the same time, I'll say we've been significantly ramping up work between Orphan Solutions, the Homeless Services Department, and the Sheriff's Office, especially to work on better connections to shelter beds and outreach teams as folks are approaching jail release.
Is any of the, oh, sorry, Ryan, I just had a question. Are any of the youth systems included in this conversation, OYA or the DCJ?
Yeah, and they're not shown there, but that's one of the we're really lucky to have Deanna join. She's been with OIA previously, so we've got some connections there now that are a little bit easier. And then I'll go last to our policy tables focused around health systems integration. Again, a really wide range of partners in that work. Our hospital systems, HealthShare has been a really important leading voice and organizer for a lot of this work. And it aligns really specifically and really clearly with Metro's prioritized regionalized work to help the housing and health system integrations. So several areas of focus across these policy tables. We're looking at viability of Medicaid as a funding source, at least partial funding source for things like crisis response and outreach. That was part of the plan from the beginning. Ending hospital releases to the street and improving coordination between housing and healthcare systems so that we can expand access to permanent supportive housing, as well as help improve outcomes for people so they get access to the care that they need to be stable in that housing. On the first area, Medicaid as a potential payment source for outreach and crisis response. Multnomah County's COO has contracted with a Medicaid expert, a consultant, to help explore the feasibility of Medicaid billing in several settings, including those. And I think we're due for her report at the end of the month-ish.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So really looking forward to that, trying to understand where there are some pathways versus where there are dead ends.
Sorry, Chris, when that initially started, I was told it would be mid-May so that we would have opportunity to get something in the budget. It's now pushed back to the end of the month.
Last I heard it was toward the end of the month, but I'll double check.
Okay, can we chat more about it?
Know that far.
Yeah. Awesome, we'll talk more. Thank you.
Yeah, and I may be misspeaking as well. I didn't actually know the date. So, and then, so we're looking forward to that. We're also working actively with the hospital systems from throughout the region right now to collect some better data from the hospital systems around the numbers of people experiencing homelessness who are being discharged from inpatient medical settings within the hospital systems. Once we get our heads around the scope of what that looks like, and I will preview that it looks large. I don't think that will surprise anyone, but we're certainly in the hundreds of folks on a monthly basis, not tens. But we'll start working with them to explore feasibility for prioritized shelter, recuperative care access coming out of hospitals. Our hospital system partners have been really proactive in engaging with this work, and it builds on a lot of work that HealthShare has done with them over the past several months. And then we're also working on the last piece. I'll give you a deeper dive in the next slide on some of the work that we're doing to help marry healthcare navigation with permanent supportive housing. But we're also working to align this policy table with recent state level work that's identifying the range of needs that people that are sort of generically being grouped as permanent supportive housing, but they're helping to delineate is what we think of as permanent supportive housing as a evidence-based practice versus what's a more intensive inpatient treatment setting that's even more service intensive than what we would typically provide in PSH. So the state is working on is using that framework to work on some funding proposals as part of this legislative substance. So we're watching that closely and looking for opportunities there. But you go to the next slide, the deeper dive on one of these pieces. So, I gave you really general updates on a lot of these policy tables, but wanted to go deeper on a specific highlight that I think really demonstrates that work to both hold ourselves accountable in the shared work, but also remain adaptable when opportunities arise. So action item 7.2.7 started as it actually came during the public feedback portion of developing the plan from housing providers who were really calling out that health system access to housing was really, really important. And equally important was that once folks were in housing, those housing system providers needed good connections back to our healthcare system so that they could get, so that folks could get access to the care that they need, and they could coordinate that with the housing providers to help them stay stable in their housing. This action item was described originally in the plan primarily as a technological solution. It's like a data sharing platform. And as we started into the initial feasibility around work around that, that was like in a couple of years kinds of thing. And it was questionable what, how it would slot in. So instead, we were able to pivot in consultation with the implementation committee to reflect work that's now underway with regional leadership from Metro and HealthShare under the regional integration continuum pilot that's prioritized and funded through the SHS Tri-County Planning Body. There are actually different case coordination pilots that are happening in each of the 3 counties right now. I would say Washington counties is the most advanced. Multnomah County was the last of the 3 counties to start that work up. But it's now been going for about 6 months. Here in Multnomah County, the partnership started between HealthShare and Northwest Pilot Project and has just very recently expanded to include Cascadia, Central City Concern, and a few others. And essentially, it's working with permanent supportive housing providers and connecting them to care coordinators on the health system side so that they can freely exchange information about where a person is able to access care to help coordinate getting them into appointments and have that feedback loop between the housing provider and the healthcare providers. Again, with the focus on keeping folks stable. So a lot of work there to develop the initial release of information, which sounds like a very simple thing and is incredibly complicated. The number of lawyers that you consult for that, to be able to cross that barrier between the healthcare system and the information that's allowed to be shared there, and the housing system and the information that's allowed to be shared there, as well as sort of the technical, our ability to track who's being case conferenced and what some of the outcomes of that work look like. So with that initial focus, connecting permanent supportive housing providers and health system providers, we've been able to really quickly move from that focus in permanent supportive housing and start work on expanding that to now include behavioral health focused street outreach teams that began collaborating under the fentanyl state of emergency. So using the same approach, the shared ROI, folks who are working primarily in the health system, folks who are working primarily on the street outreach side, making connections there to get folks access to care, shelter, and housing support that they might need. So again, it's an example of, we started with one idea that was trying to achieve a goal. It didn't look very feasible, and there became opportunities to expand on other work that could get us more quickly to the outcomes that we were looking for. And it's been, I think, so far, a really good example of the partnership that we're seeing.
I'd like to pause there. So 7.2.7, the original HRAC folks, the ones, I just understand, was this point that was part of the agreement between the city and county? Is that the verbiage that was used?
So the body of the IG, do you want to answer that?
Well, yeah, that original
Yeah.
at some point was part of the action plan, which is an addendum to the IGA.
I guess not as a judgment of the outcome of these two kind of branching off, but the idea that the implementation committee has taken this idea and said this thing that was agreed to isn't going to work, so now we're going to do this new thing. I guess, was there a checkpoint in with this body before my time, or maybe that I missed, or
And
free agents on the field, so to speak, and where does the SOC have oversight?
well, let's just have this discussion really quickly, because you're looking at the person who just made the call
Yeah.
to move the work forward. We're going to take this to the implementation committee. We're going to explain the why and where we're going and make a recommendation to them and get their blessing. If this body decides you want to be this deep, then we will take more time in meetings should a scenario like this happen again. Some of this will happen in the context of HRAP 2.0, and you will be involved in that engagement. But I certainly don't think, to be honest with you, that this body needs to make that decision necessarily. But if y'all tell me like you want a
Jillian, the reason I'm coming back to it is that I think a large part of why we got into such a struggle over the last couple of years was because so much of this operation was being wagged by the tail, so to speak. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the way that whole situation worked. We had to bring it up for a reason, right? And so when it comes to implementation committees, community committees, it's like, this is why we got off track years ago, I think, and why we've elevated a lot of stuff that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to your point. I agree with you. I would just say we need to be mindful about that because I think it was sensitive enough just to keep this agreement together last year. And then to immediately start putting some decision-making back at lower levels, which frankly, I don't have faith in that decision-making at the lower levels yet. I don't think they've proven the case yet again. So I'm a little cautious, not on this actual specific thing, but just in terms of where are we relegating the SOC to if we're just pushing all this stuff back down at a lower level. So not for this. I think these seem like reasonable split outs. I get that. And your point is also taken, and I would be cautious as well.
Well, I don't know that it's an all or nothing, right? Even just being informed via email as it's actively happening is another way where at least we can be read in,
Yep.
even if we're not having a whole meeting about it, because you need a decision before we meet again. So I wonder if you can just think about how you can keep folks more abreast than waiting for the next meeting. So it doesn't feel like where'd this come from?
I appreciate that, Commissioner, and I certainly made the call here probably against my own team. And because I do feel like I do have a good read on definitely what needs to be said out loud in this space and approved at this level versus something like this at implementation. But I hear you. We can do like that's not hard. We can do a report out via email.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up, Counselor. And I appreciate the kind of like, how can we find a middle ground for this? It is a change from what we did before. I think in our earlier meetings, this group did approve when there were changes to the HRAP, like that was part of it. So if we're going to have a change in that process, I think it would be good to hear from folks about that. Or again, like if there's a heads up. So let's continue the conversation on that.
Yeah, no, and to repeat something that Ryan said, those early action items that the joint teams got done were all very clear. Everybody knew what they meant. There was shared understanding. We're now getting into the more meaty systems integration work where the language that got written didn't necessarily capture where the work is at today, given HealthShare's involvement at the state level or stuff going on at Metro. So hence a reason for HRAP 2.0, where we can, as we reorganize the plan to the way we are looking at data now based on the new dashboard, we are going to have some clarifying work to do among some of the action items, and you'll see all of that.
And this group will approve the HRAP 2.0.
Yes. In October, on October 15th, I look forward to your approval.
I struggle a little bit with 2.0 because it sounds like we're writing a new plan.
Nope, we're not.
So this is really just a part of what we should be doing as constant process improvement is, hey, we're analyzing these things. These are the updates after year 1, year 2, year 3. Okay.
And I'm going to inject it quick and then we'll pivot to Robin. I'm calling it a reorientation. That's probably not the best word, but like now that the AHSD beautiful dashboard has like inflow right at the top, ask me right now, which action items are really tackling inflow? It's not organized in that way. So I want all the action items that address inflow under inflow, all the action items under outflow. I want under outflow. And I think we all can better track, the public can better track. Like, we're working on this because of that. And so that is really the underpinning of HRAP 2.0. It's not a new plan.
I really appreciate that. I do think that message and commitment to process improvement and integrating what we have learned is really important without slowing down, stopping, and making a new plan. Because I think we've spent a lot of years in making plans, and plans just as good as when you crash into reality. So how can we make this a living thing without having to pause and lose any momentum? I think
And that's
really
the core of this body's work, I will say, is with the advice and insight of the implementation committee and the community committee to really make sure that this is a living document that reflects where we are in the changing situations that we do, and the data dashboard being a huge tool. So thanks.
Any other thoughts or feelings? Directions?
I know too much about this one, so forgive me if I'm a little bit in the weeds. I think this is incredible work that's really making a difference. I think we hear a lot that there is no capacity in the system. And as it turns out, there's a little more capacity when you put the experts who know how to navigate each of those systems together to talk about it. I would encourage us to lean into this a little faster. I think the population that Multnomah County chose for probably good reasons is pretty narrow. And our ability, now that we have the by name list and we have all this data, to really kind of lean into that process is huge. So just encourage that.
And that is a good segue to my offer as I leave the table, which is, these areas that we're exploring, these cross-sector engagements with this policy table, we are happy to provide a deep dive at any point for this group in terms of the stuff that you're really interested in trying to understand and help shape. So let us know which of these really pique interest, and we'll be responsive to that as we can.
So I've got a follow-up. I'm sorry. What is the population that we're limiting to?
But currently it's limited to folks who are in permanent supportive housing. That was the initial pilot implementation of the case conferencing work. So we're now expanding the number of PSH providers that are working in that context. And like I said, expanding that now into street outreach context.
Okay. Can we please make sure that we're not just using providers that are already a part of the medical system? Because if we don't work out the kinks between non-medical providers and the health system, we're never going to crack this nut.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So, a similar urgency concern. After listening to this, I can't quite articulate what it is we're trying to solve. And what I would like to hear when we do these in the future is a statement from, here's the end state, here's what we want to get to. Because right now, this sounds like a whole lot of people are convening with a whole lot of people to talk about a whole lot of things that could be a possible whole lot of options. And I have no idea what the hell we just talked about from how do we start aligning other aspects, to your point of like getting the right people in the room to work on the right thing. Okay, but what is the goal we're going after? Where is the snag we're at this month? What is the thing we can rally around? Who is the person or the expertise that we need to bring in? Because this seemed like an update of, we have 3 or 4 thought bubbles that are maturing in the air, but not a way in which we're convening actions, steps. And so I'm having trouble to understand, where do we leverage city, county, or other expertise to move a work plan forward, and to what end? So as I say that, and I was having a tough time trying to understand, like, why does this not feel like an urgent conversation? And I think it's because I don't know what step we're either hung up on, or why we learned there's capacity, or whatever that is. But I'll just stop there, and that it doesn't feel very directed. And I think being very directed is a way to improve very difficult problems.
I wasn't going to say anything. We've got a lot to accomplish, but I just want to talk about what Councilor Zimmerman just mentioned. And I wrote a note about 5 minutes ago, and I said, we're talking a lot about activity versus outcome. And without an outcome, you don't know that mission or where you're headed. And to Commissioner Singleton's point of view, HRAP 2.0, when we haven't truly been successful at HRAP 1.0, I think we need to establish outcomes, put them on the board. And with all due respect, I may not know what the mission of this meeting is, but I fear we talk a lot and I don't know where we're headed. And I really appreciate you, Jillian. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you coming into our incident command meetings, you've been a breath of fresh air, and combining our collaboration and partnership. I really want to talk about what are we going to do with the carceral setting. Great work. And then the medical system as well. Great work. Ryan, I asked for a histogram or a range of participants in the system, and I still want to see more. Where are we at today and where are we headed? So just to complement what you two.
I also think it would be helpful. I mean, I think you guys who are in the work every day know what 7.2.7 means,
Yeah.
but the fact that 7 actually relates to a goal, that 2, you know what I mean? Like, I think some of that would be helpful just for folks who aren't deeply in the work every day to understand, like, these do roll up to both goals and yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just to, you guys are deep in it. That means something that it's hard, especially because these are, public meetings and we have folks
Yeah.
listening in to make those connections to how each of these policy areas, each of these areas of focus really tie to those goals that are at the crux of the action plan.
Where are we at and where are we headed? What's that goal? That's a great point.
Yeah.
So I caution too much of a journey that prematurely gets us to an outcome-based discussion before we've laid the foundation. I think that's part of the challenge that we've had historically as a region, and thus as a subpart of the region being Multnomah County and the cities that exist here, is because ultimately we are all at different points of this solution and all at different points of the problem. And many times we put out there what we think it is, and then we have to readjust well down the line because that wasn't really the problem we were trying to solve. And so as I sit here, I had some of the same thoughts, but then I had to kind of readjust to ensure that I'm having the patience. I mean, because Gresham's on a different path right now than where other cities are. And I have to be patient to ensure that we are all at some point getting to the same starting point. And if we're all starting at different starting lines, we're going to end up, at different finishing points. And so I would probably just put a little bit of caution in the premature identification of those ultimate goals. Now, what Minnie said a few moments ago, I think was very astute in that we're not pausing the efforts. We're trying to do this while we're in motion because all of us are frustrated by we're not achieving what the outcomes are. And I think part of the challenge is it's tough to identify what that is. And it's tough to identify something where we all disagree on what that outcome is. And so if you don't understand the problem, we're not going to agree on the outcome. And so I think if we tried to do outcome-based conversations right now, to the degree we have that clearly and concretely identified, I think we would have some substantial disagreements because I think we're all starting from different starting points. And I think that's part of the challenge. And so while, I'm also encouraged to try and get to that point, I think we still have to lay that groundwork while we're in motion, changing the tires on the car while it's moving. I think to get to that ultimate outcome and get the agreement and the confidence of everybody sitting around this table, which we all know that we represent a much larger group than what's sitting here. And we've got to take all this information back and deliver it to them so that they have the same type of concrete agreement and confidence that what we're now going to implement as we go forward is going to get this part of the region to the outcome that we all desire.
I don't want to take up more time, but I just want to say, for me, the way I'm digesting this is that this is a fact-finding mission. Like, right, you guys set like really strong goals about how you wanted to proceed forward with the HRAP. And I think there are some things that are probably going to be met with an outcome that'll come to a conclusion. But just even navigating this, knowing full well, having an understanding of the complexity of the hospital system, our community-based systems, our mental health systems, that's a lofty goal. And, knowing that, you've been able to parcel that out and understanding, like you said, here are the barriers from legal, with just as much as even trying to data share among these systems. Like that's a major barrier, that in an obstacle that you wouldn't know without having these conversations and identifying what those barriers to then change what that implementation and that goal looks like. That's critical information for us to be able to then have a clear path forward and design an outcome that will truly be met based on what can actually occur within these systems. And when you navigate, that's what I'm digesting from that. So I think it's and I don't want to overstep or overspeak, but I do think it's a little bit of a twofold process in that there will be some solid outcomes from a 1.0. And then the 2.0 is, this is what we learned and what we gathered in this process. And this is where we go from now. Here's our path forward.
The pivot.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
So
Yeah.
my vision for your approval on October 15th is sort of, here's what we have accomplished. Now, after we took a deep breath as a group and redefined where we're going forward, here's where we're going forward now. And outcomes and KPIs, and I put those in two separate categories, are going to be part of that discussion. And yes, we have more immediate outcomes that we are all looking for, as well as long-term systems integration work and data work that must happen. It's both. It's not either or.
fact.
Okay, urgent and long-term.
Appreciate it, but I don't want to wait for October for KPIs. We've established them a year ago.
Yeah.
With this, so let's, to the chair's point, I think we should have them listed so we can digest them every meeting. Yeah, to help.
It might be worth figuring out what I don't want to let you down in October and come here and be like, I actually needed way more time with these materials to understand.
Mhm.
And so I think it might be worth figuring out what folks at this table need if you're looking for a decision at some point, so we can actually scaffold to that. Because I agree, when I read 7.2.7 on the agenda, I was like, what is that? So it's really helpful, I think, to get us where we need to be and the information we need to have to be able to give informed feedback and have that discussion with y'all.
It might be, I mean, it might be even as helpful just to have copies of the HRAP for everybody at these meetings, so that, because that references it would have the KPIs for all of the different, like all of, a lot of the things you were talking about exist, the goals, the KPIs. So maybe it's just having that reference.
Yeah.
So we can help with that. We can help
Yeah.
facilitate that. Okay. I know I appreciate the conversation. We're a little bit behind time and I don't want to, and the mayor has to leave early.
Keep on filling these agendas where we have no time for discussion, but frankly, that's a very valuable aspect of this. And if we moved on from Ryan straight into the next thing without discussion, this would be like the last meeting, the meeting before that, the meeting before that. And I gotta say, I think this discussion is helpful to get a sense for where the mayor's at, where Mindy's at. Like, I need to hear that.
Great. No, I appreciate that. I also recognize that the mayor has to leave a little early today and there's a section that he has asked for. So I want to make sure, hopefully we can facilitate that. This next thing coming up is also a very important
Thank you.
conversation.
Yeah.
We can choose to, where's Anna? Where's Anna Plum?
She's out.
I can pull Anna. We could skip to that section. We can
The,
do Robin on the back end.
if we could do an audible on this one, Jillian, and to allow Counselor Zimmerman more discussion, I think that's great. This is an item that's very important, and I'm going to ask that we defer it to the next one because of that importance. I don't want to miss anything, and we're well beyond the scope. Brian, 10 minutes, holy cow. It's a 45-minute, and it is an important context-driven change to the contracts that we'd like to discuss. We'd like to talk about the Portland. Is Do Good here?
He should be on his way. Daniel should be on his way. He should.
So we don't have the.
Yeah, but he has a
respondents.
presentation first. I mean,
Right. If we could defer it till the next meeting, that would be important. If you want to provide context, but I'd like to just serve it back up. I've got to leave in 15 minutes. I'm so sorry.
You have 40 minutes.
They had me leave it at
Push
10.
one back.
I have a 11:30 in Salem.
You moved it.
Oh, you did? Okay, so I have time. So you're sure?
40, yeah.
Okay.
It's not a ton of time, but.
yeah. Okay, so, Chair, you want to kick off the last section first?
Do we have everyone here to do that?
I'm hoping that by the time Anna is done, Jeff, I see Jeff here. I'm
Tony,
looking,
you got Tony right here.
yeah, and we have Tony and Daniel will be here any minute.
Okay, so I just want to do a check though on the agenda item for measure 2, the shelter and housing data related to Black and African American. That also said it was a 10-minute conversation, and I just want to make sure that that is a realist. I want to make sure we get to that item today, so I want to make sure that's a realistic.
Yeah, it is just a report out because the two other times this spot, one was the previous SOC, this SOC has said, do the engagement and implement the recommendations. It was a very clear directive, but so I put that as a report out, not necessarily like that's why there's no vote on anything. And the engagement, there's internal and external interest that the engagement continues. So it's not a final
Okay.
that's not final.
I just want to make sure we've got enough. we have enough
Rethinking
time
into
for it. Okay, great. So we'll switch the agenda items, but I want to make sure we get to measure two and have that conversation. Okay.
Okay. Do you want to kick off?
Yeah.
We're gonna say something.
Oh, yes, I was. I had a
Then.
little bit.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we're gonna switch. Thanks everybody for the flexibility there. I appreciate the flexibility with the mayor's schedule so that we can make sure we get to the fourth agenda item today. So this conversation really builds on some of the conversations that we've been having. So it's a really timely one for this group. We had a county board work session led by Commissioner Singleton. That she mentioned the last time we were together, that was really looking at our shelter system. The county board has been looking closely at data across our shelter system. And that data has informs both budget and policy choices as we work our way through our current budget process that we're in right now. It also provides good foundational framework for conversations that will continue this summer related to FY27 as we think about what that system needs to look like based on the resources that we're going to have going forward. So really appreciate the time for this today. And I want to pass it off to Mayor Wilson for some of his introductory remarks.
Okay, great. Thank you. A few weeks ago, my morning as mayor began with the discovery of bones in the remnants of a burnt homeless encampment. The police told me they had not yet established how long her body had lain there, undiscovered. Investigation into whether her death was a tragedy or a crime will take time. As Sky will attest, we are recovering bodies weekly, and these are the reports I'm greeted with when I arrive at work. Echo Northwest, in our last meeting, had noted that homelessness was a housing problem, and I think we all agree. The governor and I announced last week removing all SDC fees on the next 5,000 homes. However, a builder or developer has to deliver them within the next 36 months. We're going to flood the market. We're going to build housing of all income levels. We're going to increase vacancy and we're going to reduce the cost. In addition, in my budget announced on Wednesday, I put in seed funding for the Portland Housing Access Initiative to help unlock the 200,000 empty bedrooms in Portland that are empty right now to allow deeply affordable housing to flood the market. $700 to $800 places to rent with only about $340 to $400 to move in instead of your first and last month's rent, which often costs $4,000 when we try and provide the dignity of housing. So we agree with Echo Northwest. However, homelessness may ultimately be a housing issue, but we can only house those that are living. Unsheltered homelessness is a solvable crisis, but only if we work together in this room to act swiftly and quickly. Portland and the county have made clear promises to shelter our unsheltered and provide life-saving care. Portland is committed to add 1,500 beds by December 1st, which is 206 days away. There's not a senior leadership meeting at the city of Portland where we don't begin with that date. That is our mission. That is our outcome. County, through the Homeless Response Action Plan, has promised us 1,000 beds by December 31st. That's 236 days away. We also talk about that in our incident command meeting. And Jillian, I appreciate you joining us on that weekly meeting. We had Mayor Landrieu, who was the former mayor of New Orleans, who is now or was recently the advisor to the White House to President Biden, who had 8,000 people living unsheltered in New Orleans. And 2 years later, he had 1,000. We invited him in last week or 2 weeks ago to explain to us the why and the how. How did you accomplish this? And he said these things. Setting unreasonable goals can be effective. His goal was no homeless on the streets. And then he followed up by saying, then you must be relentless to ensure that that mission or goal is achieved. So he'll be helping us along this way. And I invite him to come and talk to us when he arrives in town because he wants to help us with this. We have the nation here to help us. We have to change the way in which we're doing our business. And here today, we're here to talk about the way we're doing our business. I'm happy to start with what I feel is our model program, of which I've been working with our homeless service providers this last 4 and 5 years to develop. I appreciate Jillian for adding this to this discussion. I'm happy to begin with what I feel are the models, or we can begin with Anna, whichever you provide. How would you like to?
We're gonna start with Anna.
Okay.
And you can skip this slide. I was gonna do some level setting on a few things, but we'll skip it. Thank you, Maggie.
And we've got a lot to talk about, so, morning, everyone. State my name for the
No.
We wanted to start by highlighting some of the existing information about sheltering and shelter best practices. At our last meeting, I mentioned that we had recently finished a review of emergency shelter best practices that was available on our website. So I wanted to highlight some of that information here. We will follow up with the full report, but it is also on our website. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we understand to be sheltering best practices, and then talk a little bit about where we are as a community with those sheltering practices. Remind you of our data and where we're going with our data to support all of those best practices. And then I think we can have some more discussion. When are we having?
After you.
Okay,
After
and then we will hear from our experts in the room. So this slide, I know it's very tiny, so I wanted to show the image, but the basic points are in the table. The report that I'm mentioning evaluated sheltering best practices, and we talked a lot about the 5 keys to effective emergency shelter from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So that's what is here. Those are using a housing first approach, and that, making sure that anyone can access shelter. There are not prerequisites, services are voluntary, and then it leads directly to housing as soon as possible. That there is a safe and appropriate diversion. So where possible, finding ways to problem solve with folks an alternative to entering shelter. There is immediate and low barrier access to that shelter. So eliminating both physical and sort of other kinds of barriers to entry, having them be open 24/7, and then allowing 4 Ps is what they call it in the research: pets, partners, privacy, and possessions. They also talk a little bit about sort of making sure that the location is comfortable and it's in a convenient location. So those barriers to access can be physical and administrative and emotional as well. The 4th is having a housing focused rapid exit services. So making sure that you have shelter services that are focused on assistance to housing access. And then of course, using data to measure performance. And they call out some specific things to measure, but they also talk a lot about a combined review of those elements, because one alone is not going to tell you that information. So the things they call out is measuring length of stay in the shelter, exits to housing, and returns to homelessness, but looking at those in combination. And I'll talk a little bit about how we do that and why I think that's really important in a minute. There's more detail on all of this in the report. We didn't send it with the materials because we understand people don't tend to read long reports, but we will send it, I think, as a follow-up, Rachel. Next slide, please, Maggie. So this just goes over the same thing. It's very brief sort of where we're at with HSD shelters. So we do require a housing first approach in all of our contracts, and the report itself lists how we frame that in our contracts to all of our providers, not just sheltering, but all of the HSD contracts. In terms of safe and appropriate diversion, we do have some of this, but there are funding constraints. So one example is the Ticket Home program, which is a program that is designed to help folks who have a housing option outside of the county or outside of the state access that option. I want to be clear, that's one specific program, but we have for a very long time allowed our providers to use client and rent assistance for that purpose. So if you aren't a member of the Ticket Home program, but you are a case manager and someone is saying, I can go live with my mom, she needs care, I can live with her and for the remainder of my time on this earth, but I just need a bus ticket, right? I just need a ticket. You can already use client assistance funds to do that, and we've been doing that in the provider system for a very long time. But there are other limits to that. We also do coordinated access across the county. So if somebody is going with a coordinated access process, and they may be assessed to be not quite in a priority pool, or perhaps there just isn't an available program for them in that moment, going into problem solving conversations with them. Similarly, do you have a place to stay somewhere else? Do you have a family member? Are there other options for you? So those problem solving conversations are ways that we do diversion right now. We do work to ensure that most of our shelters are low barrier and immediate access. Our shelters are 24/7. They generally accommodate the 4 Ps with varying levels. A motel shelter obviously provides more privacy than a congregate shelter, for example. And most of our shelters are low barrier. We do fund some that have some sobriety requirements, for example, but that's a smaller portion of the sheltering system right now. Having housing focused and rapid exit services is very, very important. And I would say that some of our programs have a lot of housing access services, some have none. And we're actually in a process right now to realign that across the system so that the shelters, that there is a sort of equitable alignment of access to housing services across the shelter system. So we're sort of midway through that process and looking at, as we do our contract renewals for 26, what that looks like. And then for data to measure performance, we do currently measure length of stay, utilization, so how many units are filled, the number of participants, and the exits to housing. And we focus on a combined review herein. So we are, many of our contracts actually do have, for example, a length of stay goal in the contract, and that is something that we're looking at along with those other items. So shelter programs are reporting to us their utilization rates and their exits to housing. Next slide, please, Maggie. Just a quick reminder, I will just keep talking about our data because I'm proud of it. So thank you for your patience. We do already look at our shelter utilization. This is a screenshot of the new dashboard. I do want to use this chance to tell you that the numbers for the next month will be up May 15th. So there will be new numbers in about a week. This shows average occupied shelter units and then the number of those that are filled by month. I do want to put out there, we actually think that occupancy is an undercount. That 91% is great. And we actually think the occupancy is higher than that. We know we have some data entry challenges that we're working with our shelter providers. So we think this is an undercount of how many units are full at any given time. And this is, again, looking at how we look at exits. And we talked about this last month, but I wanted to highlight that we are looking at exit destinations from shelter, and you can look at it by shelter type and by system type. And you can, as we get longer into time, you'll be able to select a specific year. And the major categories we look at are permanent housing, homelessness, and then temporary housing or other institutional setting. Again, that homelessness one is a little bit tricky because if someone moves from one shelter to another shelter, they're going to show as exiting to homelessness because that is still a homelessness situation. So that's one that's a little bit tricky to look at. This is what's available publicly. And I do want to remind folks that we, again, already collect this information on a provider level basis via quarterly reports that our providers submit to us. But we are working towards having those quarterly reports done more frequently and sort of more technologically and quickly. So this is next slide, Maggie. This is a screen. Oh, sorry, one more. This is a screenshot of what that will look like. I know it's really tiny, and but this will be what a provider will see. So you can see there's program outputs over time, and that's what this is. So a provider and we at the same time will be able to see the number of clients, the average length of stay, and those exits to housing. This is by months. You'll see, or the different exit types. There will also be program demographics and then the ability to look at one project compared to other providers. So we're building towards that to have both for our internal review as contract managers and for the providers to see themselves. The goal around that is October 2025, when that will be ready. All of this data is already being collected and looked at on a more analog basis, but this will make it easier to look at over time. Next. I think that's what I wanted to put out there, is that those are the things that we sort of know from national best practices to look at. We are looking at them, and then we wanted to have a conversation. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to say one thing about length of stay really quick, then you can validate or disagree with me, Tony. Tony was one of the members of the community sheltering strategy. And when we were looking at what we wanted to measure as a community, we talked about whether or not length of stay was something that we wanted to have a goal around or a more stringent requirement around. And when we looked at the data, which you have some data in your packet, thank you, Commissioner Singleton. If you look at page 11 of that shelter data, what you see is there are shelters that have longer lengths of stay, but they also have higher positive exit stays. And so we decided as that work group not to put forward a concrete length of stay requirement because we were worried that that would be somewhat of a perverse incentive for folks who are needing extra time to stabilize and move on to their housing pathway. So while we think measuring it is important, maybe having some goals for provider, making it more concrete than that can be problematic in terms of making people who need a lot of very special, people are very different, right? And so one length of time may not work for everybody. So I just wanted to elevate that was a conversation we had, and that's where we landed as that provider and elected board group.
Yes.
Can I ask a question about where the recuperative care center got mentioned earlier in this process and just talking about the navigation of healthcare systems, but technically speaking, like RCP, which provides recuperative care for our houseless folks who have no place to go following discharge from acute care that have like wound care needs. They categorically fit in a shelter classification. How would they, and I know oftentimes, and they provide a path for housing for folks, but that is on the dime of either charitable services, which I often approve in my role, or Medicaid willing to approve someone staying there, and they will only do so long as someone has a need to stay there related to their authorization and the progression through their course. But they're doing that navigation there. So I'm just wondering where do they feel it? Like where they share the space in both these places? And is there any sort of considerations around how they will function as part of the system, both overlapping, both categorically as a shelter system, but also basically a post-acute care setting as well? Because I think that could be a gap. And right now it's used largely in that way to fill that need for this population, but they have limitations and barriers. So yeah, so I just want to name that because that's a gap there for me. Okay.
Data person, I'm like 95% sure that ours are not included in what I'm presenting. We do have some behavioral health related sheltering, but they're not the RCP units.
So I would love to know where they exist in the system in this conversation, because they play such a key and critical role, especially as a path for healthcare systems to have a safe discharge place. And they function in this dual capacity. And they are also serving as a path to keeping folks when they're able to get them into permanent supported housing situations. So they're a key player. And I think they don't fit categorically well in any of these things, and we need to make sure we don't miss them in this conversation. So
I think it's probably more informal, like it was when I was running shelter, in that I worked with RCP that they would send people to me at the safe shelter because they needed a place to go in the care.
For sure.
It couldn't be approved anymore. But I think to me, it's like, yes, the data is important, but that outflow question is how are we prioritizing? And I would say the same for our detox and sobering center, sending folks out of there. And I'd love to talk more about it, but we need to talk about people getting out of those situations and going back to the street is just setting them back further. And so how do we got to stop asking providers to prioritize people. That is our job to make those tough decisions. So,
and Laura, I think that's important, but I think we're in a stepped process and adding more access and resources is the critical part. And we're here to do that. So you're a good point.
Cindy, do you want me to weigh in here on the RCP? Maybe. We are talking about RCP beds specifically in the context of inpatient medical settings in the discharge and creating some formal referral pathways, whether it's to RCP and then to shelter or not, and directly to shelter, depending on the patient, as part of that. The action item that Ryan referenced at the beginning, that's where we're talking about those. It does happen organically. Like the commissioner said, we're trying to put some formal referral pathways and try some things out as part of that work.
Cool. Thank you.
May I, with that being said, if anybody else, may I reference what the Portland model, what we're looking at as far as our Portland Solutions model contract would state? Is that the appropriate time?
We get our providers up here first.
The reason why, and I appreciate that, but I think I would like to have feedback from them under the context of what Portland's doing. I'd rather have them qualify. I agree or disagree. I'd rather have this be a more discussion instead of hearing from they're the experts. I'd rather have them push back and say, we agree, we don't agree based on that. Because I mean, Tony, this is your model you had 7-8 years ago. And is Daniel here?
No, when he says he's on his way, he should be here.
Okay. And then there's a third one, I think, as well, right?
Jeff, right behind you.
Okay, Jeff. So I think if I would prefer the pushback, the agreement, the disagreement, so we can have a driven conversation instead of just what they want to do. Here's what Portland's doing. And I'd rather have that feedback so all of you can weigh in on if you agree or disagree. Because my hope is, and Commissioner Singleton, our hope is to share the same expectations and cross collaborate.
Yeah, let's go ahead and bring them up.
So I just want to, is there anything that you were talking about, Anna, that they were gonna build on or
Yes.
explain further? Okay.
I'm sorry, because I know this is getting a little unwieldy, but I just also, Mayor, want to acknowledge there's a big power dynamic in asking them to push back in this space. And so I think it's important that we create space that we hear from providers outside of this room, that there isn't quite
That's fine.
the power dynamic.
They're all friends, and so it's all good. They've all pushed back plenty.
And being in that role, yes,
I hear you. Okay. But we don't have Daniel, so
I feel like we've given him the, you know, this,
there he is right now. So I see him walking in the door.
yeah, and he knows he's late and that he's going to be walking into the conversation. So we have been communicating with him
All right. good.
actively. So I just, for everybody in the room, the reason why we invited the providers into the space was to share both their experience with these things, these policy and operational choices, as well as their perspectives. And the first, I wanted to just start with Tony and really have Tony and then Jeff and soon Daniel weigh in sort of utilization of bed stays and your experience with those things. And I'll just throw it to you.
Good morning, good to see you all. So most of you know me, but Transition Projects operates 700 beds across years and provide shelter for 56 years. Our basic expectation is that when you are assigned a shelter bed, that you use it. Allow a few days per month, which may include events such as short-term visits with family. If you're not using your family.
Tony, would you mind speaking up just a little bit?
Oh, yeah. In terms of length of stay, we have two different approaches to length of stay. One is we operate 3 abstinence-based shelters that are appropriate to support people in recovery. And in those shelters, we target 4 months with potential extensions of social housing. The average stay in those programs is 104 days. In our 5 low barrier shelters, we have no official stay limits, but the average length of stay does not differ very much from the state's shelters with limits. The average stay there is about 130 days. At the high end of lengths of stay, about 6% of people in our shelters have been there for a year. That's a relatively recent phenomenon.
Can you, I'm so sorry. So
So that's a relatively recent phenomenon we've seen is people being in shelters for years.
6% over a year.
6%.
Okay, right.
And while we're of course seeking shelters that are not just short, but that result in placement into permanent or stable housing. What drives those housing placements is not stay limits, but access to rental assistance, supportive services, housing availability. It's important to note that shelters across our portfolio and across our community have different access levels to these resources. So in some of our shelters, just 33% have access to case management, while in other shelters, 88% have access to case management. So that's really important. And so let's talk about just briefly about the program with 88% of participants who have access to case management. It's a program we folks, and I will validate your point. So in that program with the average length of stay is actually our longest, 206 days, but it's the shelter that has our highest placement rate. So historically, more than 60% of folks exiting that shelter go directly into housing. Yeah. It also has a dedicated rent assistance for that shelter. It's our shelter.
Using that was medical case management, average stay was over 200 days, 60% placement.
Rent assistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A longer length of stay can cause a positive correlation to housing if we have those.
All right, Daniel, do you know where we're at? We're on just on the first point that we talked about utilization of bed stays, experiences with that. You want to weigh in next?
Sure.
Go for it.
Hi, I'm Daniel. Work at Do Good. Feel a little underdressed. Apologies.
I got a t-shirt on too.
Right here.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
So, yeah, my experience is you can get folks housing ready in 90 days, which means they're document ready, they have all their stuff, but there's no place for them to go. And so, we have county, city has invested a lot of money, the last 4 or 5 years in adding shelter beds. Maybe an extra 1,000, we're around 3,000 shelter beds right now. I'm not sure that we're not efficient with our beds. And, Mayor, I appreciate you wanting to add 1,500 more in like a humanitarian approach to this. And I think we can all agree that, yeah, we don't want people sleeping outside. That's not great. But we're not good with shelter beds. And at the same time, we have no place to fucking send them to. It is, and we talked last night, that is an absolute pain in the ass to develop the city. And as due to all a few affordable housing projects, and we got quite a few in the works now, is expensive, it takes forever, and it's just a pain in the ass. And so if we want to make better use of our shelter beds, we gotta give an opportunity to get out. And one of the big things that was helpful with this organ and we think we have like $3 million or something like that. We put 200 folks into apartments from around these sites, and about 88% of them a year and a half later are still in that apartment. And it works, and that's guaranteed positive placements. We're opening up these sites that cost $5 million to shelter, and that survey came out a while ago, and where like folks choose whether or not they want like an apartment or a hotel or a congregate. In a congregate shelter, it was almost dead last to sleeping outside. And you continue to invest in that. And say, let's take that money, do a little bit of housing first approach here, like true housing first approach, where they're actually supported with appropriate dollars. And I think we'll see the city turn around. That's just my 2 cents with this. I'm not sure if that's.
No, thank you. Jeff, let's have you weigh in on this piece of it.
So, yeah, Daniel. Our bed utilization rates, and that's contention sometimes with the county, but we had a bit different approach to using bed fees. We will put a couple together in the same pod with two beds. So looking at our bed utilization, we should really count our pod usage and not our bed space usage going forward. So I had my data analysis run some numbers at our Clinton Triangle site, range from a little over 90% to 100%. Let's see. So that's where we're at. In terms of like moving people through the system, it's very hard. And like Daniel was saying, we did have those organ vouchers earlier last year, and we did have some multnomah vouchers through Sunstone Way earlier last year. But those are dried up. We don't have any kind of driving force to move people into housing. So we've taken a little different tact. The city has allocated a little bit of housing funds to us. And so what I've done is use those funds to enroll our guests into vocational programs. We have people in flagging school, like 40 of our residents in flagging school. We have people taking the CDL driver's license courses for Class A and Class B licenses. We have people enrolled in the the Certified Alcohol and Drug Counseling certificates, the peer support specialist certificates. But our idea is to elevate our residents to get into jobs where they can afford housing. Because if they're just going into these minimum wage jobs, working in warehouses, working at gas stations, they're going to fail. They're not going to make enough money to sustain whatever housing option is given. If we do the minimal amount and give them some subsidies to get in, they're going to drop off somewhere down the road where they don't have enough money. So elevator model is our first option. Also, in terms of like shelter stays, I'm like, shelter stays can be good, but with a caveat, like people have to be assessed. It's like earlier that people have benefit from longer shelter stays. And I have residents. I have one resident that went homeless at the age of 9. She's now 43. She's been on the streets this whole time. She stayed in our Clinton Triangle site for a year and a half, and just recently came up to us and said, "Hey, can you help me with housing?" She identifies as a street mother in a group in Portland. And so that adds another dynamic to her issues and more hurdles that she has to overcome to get into housing and stay in housing. So there are a lot of factors that are holding people back from just a short-term turnaround because they're living with trauma, they're living with mental illness, they're living with addictions. So we are trying to provide them services for them so they can overcome those hurdles. We're trying to ramp up our mental health services. We have mental health counselors now. We have other organizations coming and providing mental health services, and we have universities interested in providing their residents, their students to come in and provide mental health services. We also we have people funneling in and out of detox. Let me just add this strategy that we've developed. So as a consequence of the Peninsula Processing site opening 2 years ago, some of our residents identified as wanting to go to detox. We sent them out and they came back and had 100% relapse rate. And so that was a catalyst to start segregating our sites. Along with Nate DeCara, the street services, the command center, wanting to bring people off the streets temporarily into our site so that we could wait for a detox bed or recovery bed. That was really the catalyst. Those two things put together. So what we did is at Clinton Triangle, we separated 71 of the pods. And if you come to the site, there's a big overhang that probably used to be for a lumber yard. We just put a fence around it. What we're doing is we're offering more services to those folks. And this is intentional. We're giving them more food. We're giving them groups. We're giving them yoga classes. We're giving them whatever we can provide for them. Mental health services. We got a mobile medical assisted treatment van coming in to give them medical treatment for addictions. So this is to create an interest in recovery. This is to create an interest in getting out of the lifestyles of the folks that were getting off the streets and getting them into services. So that's kind of the approaches that we're taking. I think
Really wanted to talk about stay limits, bed utilization,
so
and
stay limits,
yeah. So I appreciate what you're saying. We're sense of urgency. I've got time, and you're doing a great job.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So I think the mayor has to leave. in
Yeah,
about 10
I want
minutes.
our
Wait,
topics are bed utilization, stay limits, and engagement requirements. So I don't want to. You're doing a great job. You have a great system. I just want to keep us on target. So
Yeah, thank you for the statement comments. Why don't we pivot to service requirements and we'll start with Daniel this time.
About service requirements.
we're just such a conversation, and
Engagement
no, I'm all for continue on with. If we're talking about those three key topics, that's fine.
Yeah.
Continue.
So, yeah.
It's okay. We're it's
Yeah, it's okay. Let me just state something out loud. It is okay that the mayor has to leave early, but I didn't want to cut the conversation short just because of that.
yeah.
So-
We can continue on, and
So ours is pretty simple. We just ask folks to engage with our case managers once a week. Expects about every other week, but that can change depending on the person's barriers. So sometimes, if they're on a wait list for 3 months, we'll check in periodically just to make sure they're okay. That's kind of where we're at. And I think it points to the larger picture that whatever the rules you want to put in place and engagements doesn't really matter unless there's some place for them to go.
Tony?
Just super succinct. Some of our shelters have the engagement requirements, some don't. The two highest placing shelters that we have, one has, the other doesn't. What's the difference is really higher percentages of case management for both of those and access to rental assistance.
yeah.
okay, we have case managers at all our sites. It is a requirement. However, not all participants or not all guests participate in communication with our staff. A lot of our residents come in with high addiction, high mental health issues, and really just are kind of standoffish, don't have any trust with us, and don't engage at all. I have a woman at I don't know Portland site that identified as to one of my staff members that she had been gang raped over a period of time. all she does is stand around and she wants to be seen, but not engaged. And so I have residents like that because we're getting like some of the highest mental health issues in the streets of Portland, which I'm cool with. I'll take everybody that's a problem case. But with that said, that we don't always get the engagement that we'd like.
So why don't we pivot to questions from all of you for our
May,
guests?
may I begin just, if you don't mind, just kind of, I wanted to outline this discussion we've been having for months and really appreciate this opportunity as well as Daniel and Tony and so on. I've known you for a long time. I want to caveat this conversation with the realization that we don't have overnight shelters. And so what we're doing here is we're looking for the day that we have access to life-saving care for everybody every night. And that's something that we're promising over this next 60, 90, 120 days. We have 430 more beds that are coming online in the next 60 days. So I don't want you to think that this discussion is for today. It's to get things ready for tomorrow to make sure we're looking in a Gantt chart or a different plans and resources as we go along. The first thing is bed utilization. We talk about it a lot, but I think we conflate it with occupancy rate. The problem with our system is we're not doing 3 bed checks a night, 1, 3, and 5. And we're conflating utilization with occupancy, yet we know the beds are empty for long periods of time. And people are out of the Sunderland site for long periods of time with their RVs there. People are at the, like the Greyhound station where they're not using the bed. It's waste in any system without a bed being used. It's just simple waste. So I want us to recognize, and Ryan, I want to say that we should change our data analytics to not occupancy. Just because we have it assigned and somebody hasn't been in it for 20 days should not be conflated with utilization. And our system is rampant with that. So let's talk about utilization and let's measure that. And that's what I want us to talk to. Hold on.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
We can talk about it.
I don't know that we can say it's rampant. I think the question is, it's more about what are our policies around how many nights out people can have. Yeah. But I really don't.
I
one example.
Commissioner, I apologize. Maybe it's just when I see this level of waste with getting calls every day of somebody dying, it's visceral, and I apologize. And you are 100% right. Then let's talk about how we can improve that. Let me finish 2 more. I fear I'm gonna have to rush out, and so I want to bring it to the table while you're here. And I appreciate each and every one of you, and you know that. The second part was stay limits. We must reduce a sticky system. We have people that are not engaging with your caseworkers because it's elective or volunteer, and I appreciate it. But if you're going to be taking up one of your facilities, that's 120, 140, 145, $60 per night. That is a resource that is life-saving care. We must have people engage in. And I recognize, to Commissioner, we've talked about a lot, but if at 90 days we don't have a caseworker, then that's on us. And that stay limit doesn't continue on. And that is happening. Second, if the person needs a trauma-informed approach because they're moving through survival mode, the caseworker must have the discretion to not exit anybody. We must make it person-centric, not system-centric. And so I want to make sure that we recognize, I understand we've talked many, many years over these things, and these are things that I've learned as well. And then fourth, engagement required. It can't be elective. It can't be check in every Monday. It has to be, what are you doing to work your plan? We must plan to get an outcome for that plan. We're not doing that right now. Now, I want you to go back and I want to frame it where I began. Let's plan a world. Our contract will be based on in 90 days when we have 100, 150, 200 empty beds every night, that you can trust us that if you're going to, and I only want to talk about 24/7 shelters, the transitional housing, which is what we're using SRV and test, that's transitional housing. Although it's not, it's what we've used or we've metamorphosed the system. I only want to talk about 24/7 shelters, not your program, not your, which you're doing great at 88%, have longer stays. I think, no, you have caseworker 88%, but your exits to housing 68%. That is working. But if you notice, it's all required that that individual, it's moving the continuum up. I want to unstick the system. People are in our shelters, in some cases, 2 years in a 24/7 emergency shelter. That is not humane for us. We must unstick and move them up and move them down. Okay, now we can open it up. I know my team's going to grab me by the collar and throw me out of here in a minute.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Mayor. It's great to hear what the city of Portland is looking at for their contracts. And I think it's a good discussion. I think what you talk about though, with some of the requirements that you're putting in really lead to that need for funding the system across it so that we don't get people stuck in that shelter, which we call it the county, the flow through is really vital. And so, I think Daniel, you talked about this earlier, the fact that we have expanded beds, but not all beds have the resources to wrap around it to help move people successfully to that next step. That has to be a really important part of the conversation as we're talking about what we're able to do with the resources we have and what the impact of one investment in one part of the system does to the other parts of the system. So again, always thinking about it as the continuum. So.
Yeah, and also I think we need to wrap our minds around that some individuals, the best they're gonna do in this life is staying in a congregate shelter. This is where it happens.
but we can get them to an SRV or
So-
test site.
So Mayor, I
Yeah.
appreciate, I just want to make sure folks have space to talk.
Yeah, thank you.
What was your other first couple points you're talking? Sorry.
I was,
Mentioned a lot.
yeah, no worries. The first thing go ahead.
Sorry, Greyhound. Frustrating story you keep bringing up.
Yeah.
So, that wasn't true. Saying that people sleep in a tent all night long and then still have a bed at Greyhound, that doesn't happen.
Daniel, that's my neighbor, Liz.
Folks,
Yeah,
like what we talked about last night is, we don't treat these as jails. And, and a lot of times when folks go out for those 3 days, they're trying to reunite with their family. It's such a huge win for folks.
yeah.
So that's really what we're trying to advocate and push for. And then I would argue that, if you think adding more overnight shelters is going to reduce the deaths that we have on the streets, half of those came from fentanyl overdoses. And now we just have 250 people dying just in our shelters, and that's so much trauma for our staff.
Yeah.
It's a ton of trauma. I think we just kind of need to revisit that.
Yeah. That's my neighbor, Elizabeth. And so her mother and I talk every week and she was 2 years at Greyhound Station. And so when I say that, it's not a made up story. It is, I'm trying to save Elizabeth's life.
Yeah.
And these people have names. So I hear you, but I want to go back, Daniel.
The other,
I want to ask one question though. Daniel, you and I were talking about allowing somebody to move out of the shelter for 3 days a month, right? Because right now it's up to 10 or more. You can be gone. And that was what your opinion was. What do you guys think about that?
What's that opinion? That's what Junior does. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, again, as somebody who ran overnight shelter that we converted to 24/7 for many, many reasons that will take too much time to share in this meeting. And you and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
That has been policy. And I worry that we're thinking things don't exist that actually do exist within the system. And so I would ask, how do we really bring in what is actually happening, whether it's in contract or it's in the provider policies, so that we can have a more thoughtful discussion about, is this the policy that we think is the right one? 3 days out was something we did in 2008. That's always been a thing. Not every provider's the same, but what is the range and what do we think makes sense? That's the kind of conversation I think we can have here so that we get more of what's actually happening on the ground.
And so thank you, all three of you, for your time and expertise. What I think I heard all three of you say is that we have a throughput problem and you have a hard time figuring out how to get people safely out of the shelter system. And you could create a lot more capacity within the existing services that you have if we had a exit plan. So I see you head nodding. I just want to make sure that's part of our policy conversation is, where do people go after shelter? Because even from the healthcare system perspective, we see that clog happening on a regular basis. And so if we want to talk about efficiency and making good use of the resources that we have, it seems to me that a key focus needs to be, how do we get people out once they're stable?
I have to go. So first of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for what you do. I've been working with you for a long time and I'm very grateful for what you do. The one thing, Ryan, I'm going to challenge you in our system. We talked about activity and outcome. I want to see a utilization rate. And I'm hopeful that you three can do a bed check at 1, at 3, at 5, like other cities are doing. Tell me what our utilization rate is, and then we can start focusing on changing. Occupancy rate doesn't hold any promise to me because it's a number without knowing if somebody's using that life-saving care or not. So I hope we can step away from that and know that that's what we need to have every day looking at. And then show me that to be 90%, and I'll say we got ourselves a system that's working. So
Thank you. Thanks for
thank you
sharing
all.
your
I
ideas,
appreciate
Mayor.
this.
Any other questions for our providers while we have them here before we move forward?
Anything else you wanted to share today? Any points that you wanted to make that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Just one quick one from me. I do think that there's a structural problem with flowing people through.
Oh.
And that is, I think we try to often solve the solve flow through with only rapid rehousing dollars. And that has led to a cliff, I think. The truth is, what used to happen in our programs is people would get and they could probably afford housing. Wouldn't probably the best housing, but they could probably afford housing. Probably be okay. That was kind of the ticket for a lot of folks into permanent housing. Then at one point, we noticed that people were getting SSI, SSD, and they weren't going anywhere. The reason they weren't going anywhere is because that check no longer could match what a land was. And I think as a result, we tried to problem solve that with short-term rent assistance, which ultimately does not work. Ultimately, it is eviction, homelessness, and I really think we have to think about so long-term. I think this is probably what Daniel's getting to. The long-term implications of this, where we don't actually have a problem, we don't have a solution to this problem, and so. I'm pretty sure that we have a large percentage of the folks that we need for serving.
It's not sufficient.
It's really good information.
So Anna, yeah, so sorry.
Thanks, Chair.
I saw your hand was up, Anna.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think I just want to clarify for my own self that, I think I heard the mayor say 1,500 more beds added, and then I heard an additional 1,000 by the county. Is that 1,000 within that 1,500, or is that in addition to the 1,500? And then I think it just raises the question for me of, I think I do see this as like there's wraparound services that are needed to ensure the success for people who every situation anybody is going through who is currently sleeping outside has really unique needs and barriers that they're facing. And so, has there been conversation like this, but maybe even more deeply, to just pose the question around, do current service providers have the capacity? I think about staffing, facilities, operations, all of that, and access to those other additional services that support folks who are facing addiction or mental health challenges or other things to scale up to accommodate those additional beds. Or I just think about that as like a question is, do our service providers have that capacity, and are they a part of that plan? I'm sure they are, but I'm just curious. And then also, I know that we didn't discuss some of the marginalized communities that are facing disparities too, but I just think about how a question I have is how will those 1,500 new beds be addressing existing barriers to shelter access for, Black and African American individuals who are facing houselessness too. It's kind of a lot, but that's just what I'm sitting with.
Anna, do you want to address the first part of our question?
Yeah, so the community sheltering strategy, was about 1,000 units, and then the mayor, I believe, has an additional 1,000 units, so they are additive.
And then the mayor had to leave. So I don't, your last question about how the additional 1,500 beds are addressing or, focused on or proposed to address disparities. I don't have the answer to that. And we can, what?
It's fair to say they are going to be, and the plan right now is that they are going to be set up as first come, first serve. They are not targeted at any particular population necessarily.
Part of those 1,500 were like, for example, a women identifying shelter. So I think the mayor is open to seeing the need and then matching with a provider who's interested in that work. And I think that's definitely part of it. We've also met with NIA and NARA and other organizations, Urban League as well. So I think we're really open to any providers at the table who are interested in that work. So I think it kind of remains to be seen. We're just kind of building as fast as possible. So I think part of the conversation, absolutely.
Thank you, Sky. Appreciate that. Counselor Zimmerman, any questions for our providers?
Yeah, the potential non-engagement that you mentioned, sometimes people don't engage at Urban Outreach. You know, one of the, I guess, selling points for some of us who really kind of pushed the task site idea a few years ago is that this was going to be a difficult population and that the engagement was a requirement. And I'm not sure I have strong feelings about if engagement there should be or shouldn't be. I guess I'm looking to you in terms of what's your assessment of that for when you have a difficult person who refuses. Should we consider a standard that says if you refuse, you're no longer a resident at Urban Outreach? Like, is that the line that we should be getting up to? Because that's kind of how I sold it to the public.
Right, no, it's possible, but that's an option. Okay. And it might be an option because people have to have consequences for their actions. Okay. It's nothing their nations and stuff in the neighbors, native neighbors. Develop their own little system, they don't want to interact with us. Something has to break them. You have to feel like this is too hard to sustain at some point. Maybe kicking them out of the site might be that action, right?
Yeah.
So that is a possibility, but the problem with that is that people with that have been on the streets for 20 years that have a huge amount of trauma that they're dealing with, that they have to overcome, might not fit in that.
Yeah.
And they need additional services just to break through it. People with mental health issues might not fit in that mold. And so we have to be very careful about who we kick out.
Yeah. I appreciate it because, like I said, I don't know the right answer, but I was given the way we set up the test, that was an important part of it. The other thing, I'll just go back to, I think there was a question about whether or not providers are ready to increase at such a high level. And I'll just say, when we started the task sites, no Oregon providers were, and we have them today. So I think we can push the limits in terms of what's available and what is willing to, but we brought in Urban Outreach outside of Oregon to advance this idea. And I think that possibility has to remain on the table. And then lastly, we talked a little bit about the flow and that the flow is a problem. I agree, it's a problem. And I think we should get comfortable with increasing the flow problem, meaning if we have to be building, we're going to do everything we can in the city to be building. But if the street camping situation looks the same when voters are faced with an SHS question, we will lose that vote. And we should lose that vote, I think. So if we increase our capacity for shelter and by doing that, it decreases our flow because we haven't come on the other side of the housing, but that meets a lot of Portlanders' needs. And we can keep the SHS so we can focus it on the longer term development. I'm not sure that's a bad idea. I think it's just a recognizable point that I would like to explore, because this idea that flow has to be high, yes, but given the length of building of housing, and given the fact that I think we would lose an SHS vote today, I guess I'm balancing some difficulties there because I was here before SHS. I think that SHS can still be something we do, but we've got to show a difference in street camping, which means that a larger capacity of shelter for a longer amount of time. So I'm kind of wrestling with some of these ideas, and that's all I want to say.
Thanks, Counselor. So Mindy, Shannon, Laura, I'm going to give Peter a chance to speak. And then if you choose to, you can sign. I just want to make sure you feel comfortable in the space. And then we're going to wrap up the conversation so we can move on.
So from the healthcare system, we've seen a big increase in acuity, both mental health and addictions, and then the physical health kind of consequences of those things. I'm curious if you I know that's part of, not the only part, but part of the community that you serve. So as you think about your shelter operations and the policy discussions we're having, do you think about different groups of people needing different things? And how does kind of the things being batted around here help or hurt you in those different segments?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the biggest gaps that we as do-good has noticed is that folks want a clean and sober environment. You know, the big need. So much so that we're buying a hotel with the help of our friends at the joint office in county here, to have clean and sober programs for veterans. And it's such a huge need. And a big gap in the system too, because I think there's a lot of folks who really want this, but if it takes 14 days to get a bed, I got and motivated based on, you know,
You lose
they
the
can
chance.
capture the day of.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I initially wanted to talk a little bit about the engagement and exiting people. And I think that we have to, I don't know what it's going to take for us to be willing to trust our providers who are trained to do this work. But we have to figure that out, because I know both of your shelters in particular, not yours quite as well. When people aren't engaging or there's behaviors that are challenging, the staff are having conversations about that. And sometimes I had a woman who I exited honestly 30 times, but every time she came back and was always welcome to come back. And then we could get a little bit further. So I think, again, how are we really leaving the providers to do this work and inform us in how we craft particular policies and how things show up in contracts in particular? This level of policy, I think you all are more in the weeds, and that's where I'm hearing some of where the mayor's wanting to dig more, but that's what y'all are doing on the ground, and you're very effective at it. I want to acknowledge that our budget proposal has massive cuts to housing placement out of shelter and dollars for emergency rent assistance. And so that part of the flow through problem is not going to get better next year. So yes, I hear you about the unsheltered homelessness, and it would be great if we got the share of SHS that we need to actually meet the problem, which is not how it's currently structured, because then I think we could do both. So we are continuing to be stuck in a position of how can we do shelter, but also not just build so much shelter that we can't house anybody. And then in 2 years, we actually just need to build more shelter because more people are going to fall into homelessness. And I'll stop after this one. You made a point earlier about workforce, and I would love to connect with you all on what you're doing, because Commissioner Jones-Dixon and I on Monday start our workforce table, and it is exactly that. I would rather pay rent for somebody for 2 years so they can complete a training program that will give them a family wage job than to keep putting people in positions of being stuck in poverty. We've got to figure out that workforce component, because not everybody, they're stuck in that poverty wage, and you can't get training to then increase it. So we actually have to figure that part of the policy out. I have a million more things to say, but I'll stop myself.
I'm going to expand or just add a little bit to what Commissioner Singleton said. And I think shelters are a great piece of the conversation. I want to know, and maybe this is me needing to revisit like what was outlined in the actual HRAP and everything, but without the throughput or the flow to transitional housing to permanent housing, like I'm afraid that we are building a revolving door on the front end of folks that are going to go into shelter, and we don't have capacity built out for any type of transitional setting to permanent housing. And so they come out of that system and back into that system, and they're continuously flowing in that way because we don't have anything built downstream to support folks to do that. And so I would love to hear how we're sort of where the linchpin between shelter increase and transitional supports is also growing, so that we can see that for folks. I also wanted to adding to that is there's a lot of community member feedback around why individuals don't want to engage in congregate shelter. And a lot of it is around violence incidences that can occur in those settings, and people feeling unsafe, and they feel more safe to be on the streets. And so if we're going to increase capacity there, are there conversations around those challenges that happen for individuals in the setting, and how are we addressing that so that we're not creating more of that as well? And then we just have this exponential amount of beds that aren't being utilized because we haven't changed the narrative or the experience for people in accessing congregate shelter. So I think that needs to be a really important piece of the conversation. If you're going to grow volume there too, you need to address the barriers for why people aren't engaging in that aspect of navigating the shelter system. And one other thing that I wanted to kind of learn or understand in the conversation with growing the path to transitional housing is, I don't know what shelter, like what shelter you were identifying, or you're having a 60% rate of folks going into housing. I don't know if it's your Banfield or the Banfield. Great. Yeah. So that needs to be modeled tenfold, especially for hospital systems, in growing that, because that is an excellent example of folks that have high acuity needs, both chronic in terms of their physical health and behavioral health, and how they're able to go from an acute care setting or navigating these emergent systems to a supported setting where they can continue to access care, case management, medical supports, and an ability to stay long-term, so that we can then navigate the cumbersome systems that can take 6 months more for someone to go through coordinated access, get home forward voucher, get placed into permanent supported housing. So I want to make sure that like that is being thoughtfully, like all the work, the flow is being thought about through every component. Because I do think we're going to get stuck, and it'll be cyclical in a lot of different ways. So just those are my 2 cents. I just want to say out loud. So
Thanks. Peter, any questions or comments?
I do. I just want to say how much I appreciate you all coming in, and then the work that you do. I can only imagine the challenges that you've been facing. I am curious. You actually said something earlier, and I didn't catch your name. Sorry, with Urban Alchemy. So you specifically said that that you're seeing very high levels of mental health and addiction, more so here than any other place. Could you expand on
Any other place?
at Portland? You said in particular Portland.
I came from San Francisco. There's plenty of addiction there too.
Okay. But you're not seeing a change or something different in our community than others?
No.
Okay.
So actually I see less here than San Francisco.
But
that makes sense. I was in the middle of the Tenderloin. I was tasked with cleaning the Tenderloin out with all the open air drug markets.
Yeah.
So I was negotiating with the cartels and the drug dealers there. I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
This is a little bit less. The whole city wide is more spread out. It's a bigger area, but it's less. You have less dealers here. You have less drug addiction. You have less people dying on the streets. I watch people die every day in San Francisco, just about. It was sad.
Jeff, can you maybe just kind of bridge this? Was there a difference in California versus here in terms of the capacity of the behavioral health system and its connection perhaps with shelter? I just want to probe a little bit on that.
So my involvement with shelter in San Francisco, where the shelter in place hotels first initiated through the because of COVID, the city's Hastings sued the city of San Francisco because there was too many tents on the street. And there was, I'll let you know, it was an unsafe environment around the campus. Well, they want the Eastern District Court. The Eastern District Court orders San Francisco to remove 75% of the tents off the sidewalks by a given period of time. So the homeless supportive housing director, Jeff Kozinski, reached out to us and asked us if we wanted to manage shelter in place hotels. And we said, of course. So we opened up the first 3 shelter in place hotels. They weren't really designed for exit strategies. They were really just designed for housing people. And I also helped open up the Fulton Street Village, was a tent encampment. There was about 100 tents surrounding the Asian Art Museum across from City Hall. It was a pretty packed environment. And so they just fenced off the area, and we marked off those squares and got the folks to move off the sidewalk into the squares. And we had about 170 residents in that little encampment at one time, but there was no like service engagement, or we brought up food, we gave them bathrooms, we gave them showers, that kind of thing. But there was no like exit strategy at that time. So this is a little bit different. And we're working on it. In terms of drug addiction, there's a lot of different issues in Portland. The Peninsula Crossing site, the residents that were occupying that site came from a grouping of people that were already living on the site. They built the site, they just moved that group off the site, built the site and then moved them back to. Those strong social bonds and their drug addiction and negative behaviors persisted the whole time that site had been open. We just moved the last resident off the site. It's not even wise. So those are the kind of issues, strong social bonds. You have cartels coming up here selling drugs in your city. Other people are going down and buying drugs and bringing them back, you know, just independently, but there's some issues here.
So the only thing I would just add, and I just appreciate the conversation broadly, but I do feel like we are, you know, we're building the plane as we're flying it, and we just started to get the data, and we need to be focusing on constantly building that plane. I mean, it is, and building a plane while it's flying is incredibly hard. But I guess I go back to the mayor and the group all deciding what is the outcome, and I'm going to speak for me personally, but I know the others, that people sleeping in tents outside is both bad for them and the community. And whatever we do as a group, I would argue that outcome, we've got to figure that out. That can't be there. They shouldn't be dying in congregate shelters, but they shouldn't be dying in the street. But the negative outcomes associated with them being on the street is so bad. It's not allowing us to grow as a city and ultimately build the services, the revenue we need to help serve those people both in the shelter, then further on to get the services they need. And so figuring that out as we're doing it, setting those priorities at this table and getting to that place, that is a lot of responsibility, but I just appreciate the conversation. I hope we can figure that out together and decide what those priorities are and how to move them through, but we can't get stuck talking about it. We got to keep doing it. So
Thank you. This is a really important time as we're in the budget season. So we have less than 10 minutes. So
I'm suggesting we table the measure 2. It was just an interim report out because the engagement, again, as I said earlier, there is interest in that engagement continuing internally and externally. So we can bring that to the June meeting, no problem. You have the memo though to read, and if anybody wants to engage in a direct conversation on that between now and then, I'm totally open to that. Does that sound okay if we table that and jump to the remainder of the year?
I'm worried if we started the conversation, we wouldn't actually have a conversation about it because we only have 6 minutes. So let's make that the first agenda item for June. Okay. Because in 6 minutes isn't, but you do have 6 minutes to talk about the remainder of the year.
So jump to I think slide 20.
Sorry, mine's not that long. I just want to say, I'm old enough now to have been a part of the system when we used to have that step where you had to go from emergency shelter to transitional housing to permanent housing, and that didn't work either. So I want us to be careful about how we utilize transitional housing, right? It's evidence-based for very specific populations, but it should not be an expectation that people are exiting shelter into transitional housing. And the last thing I'll say is, we have got to have a conversation about expecting people to only have to pay 30% of their income for rent. We could serve more people with subsidies if we went up to 40%. And I know it's still rent burden, but it is a realistic thing that we need to talk about. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Really nice and fast.
So sorry, before I get to the remainder of 2025, thank you, Daniel, Tony, Jeff. Really appreciate you. We are going to take these 3 particular topics to the implementation committee and CAC and somehow try to organize and package all of the good information and inquiries and questions into something digestible, and we'll be back in touch on that stuff. Okay. Maggie, can we share slide 24? I think it's 24. I'll just be very, very brief. So these are the dates. I believe most, if not all, are on your calendar. I will double check that I got all those invites out the door, but these are the set dates between now and October 15th. I want to say June, we will bring measure 2 back for sure, but also I just want to highlight first thing on there, it says goal, because we are actively working with community solutions to have a convening around the new data set and a deep conversation about the by name list and how to work the list and how we segment the population to begin making progress on that. I hope to have that by the end of May. We'll see if it happens. If it does happen, where we have this convening with city, county, metro, state providers, et cetera, and you all would be fully made aware of what that agenda is going to be, we would then want to have community solutions report out to y'all about that conversation in the June meeting as well. You will also have coming at you the May quarterly report is coming out on May 15th. So you will get a copy of it on that day. We will report out on it in a big way at May 23rd, the next city county joint session. But we will also bring that to the space here on June 6th, as well as some community advisory appointments. So that's basically what June looks like. And then once both entities survive their budget processes this this summer, we are going to pull the latest data out of the dashboards and start having a comprehensive conversation about the shelter continuum, cost, services, and outcomes. Because as it's been alluded to and stated actually very directly by others here, we're going to also have to make hard decisions for fiscal year 27. And it is my opinion, it's shared also with our COO, Christopher Neal, as well as Mike Jordan on the city side of the equation, that we need to start those conversations this summer around our shelter continuum and what does it actually need to be and what can we afford. And then, so that's July and August, because that's going to definitely be more than one meeting. We have another quarterly report that will come out in August. And then in September 19th, and you will be engaged prior to this, but it will be sort of the official preview of HRAP 2.0, as well as conversations around key performance metrics with a goal of having that summit be the year in review and looking ahead with the plan coming to you for approval, as well as let's just say whether we make changes to our current metrics, add new ones. All of that is, we are open and it's on the table. That engagement will start though earlier than that, but that is what will be, that's the goal for your agenda in terms of what comes to the committee for action. But we're going to start the engagement process around HRAP 2.0 right now, this month. Any questions about that? Any desires that you think I may have skipped over? Mindy?
I appreciate this preview. I think kind of to the earlier part of our conversation, if you all could frame each of these policy discussions relative to the HRAP goal, I think that would be really helpful. Sometimes I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah. Is it silly? What I feel like I want to create is just a one pager, not a one page, it's probably 2 pages. Here are the metrics, the 4 metrics we have. Here are the additional outcomes named in the plan. There are 3. And then here are the 9 goal areas. I will put them all on one sheet of paper. So you have a quick reference guide to what those currently are. Is that helpful?
I think everybody needs to, unless it's stupid.
Sheets.
Yeah. If
What?
it's stupid small, use two.
It's a person who can't survive even a second without anything else on that.
Ultimately tying that back, like you've got the KPIs, ultimately the dream would be that you'd be tying like on that one pager, you'd actually be seeing the KPI where we were against like you'd be tracking those numbers on that same document. It's going to help us, but it's also going to help anybody that's from outside of here that's not understanding it in a quick way to actually pull that back.
Peter, I love that question because in all honesty, the KPIs were developed in a negotiation between the city and the county, separate from the plan development. Yeah. So this month, our goal in sort of the step 1, which HRAP 2.0, is to show you, here's the 9 goal areas and as they currently exist and the action items associated with those. Here's what we feel the right reorientation is: inflow, outflow, safety on and off the streets, systems integration, data improvements, etc., with those action items organized under those new categories. Within a 3rd column, putting in that KPI where the KPIs are relevant, right, or not. Because again, they were developed separately. Yeah. We don't have a metric on inflow. We need to develop one. So that's going to be part of HRAP 2.0 is better aligning those metrics, goals, and outcomes. So I hope to provide with you, May, that visual so you can understand where we are and where we're going as we move toward HRAP 2.0. I'm hoping it will be helpful, but you'll get that electronically soon. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, staff. Thank you to our providers who were here. Thank you all for the good discussion. I hope folks felt like there was a lot more chance for discussion and questions and back and forth today. That's the goal. Also love the notes on how we can make sure that we are connecting our conversations in these meetings to what the plan actually is and what the overall goals are, because that's always a good reminder. We have a plan for what the next few months are, looking a lot of work between now and then. So appreciate everybody's good work and good thinking. Our next meeting is going to be Friday, June 6th from 9:30 to 11:30. Location TBD. So we will get that out here. Thanks everyone. We're adjourned.
Y'all these Fridays.
That's a good one, Jillian.
Trying to be a brand.
Is that all you do?
I know.
No, I
Maybe
think
that's not the right structure, that's fine, but I don't know how we get all this done.
yeah, you know, all right.
Challenge I have is